You can be sitting in a perfectly quiet room with maybe a free hour and just absolutely nothing demanding your attention.
Right, which is rare enough these days.
Oh, totally rare. But instead of just sinking into that piece and enjoying it, there is this sudden, almost invisible itch.
Like a literal physical discomfort.
Exactly. Just a pang of boredom. Or maybe, a little wave of loneliness. And before you even consciously process that feeling, you're reaching for something.
Yeah, the reflex kicks in.
Right. So for you listening right now, what is that reflex? Is it picking up your phone?
Just mindlessly opening an app.
Or is it wandering into the kitchen for a snack you aren't actually hungry for? Or maybe even deciding you suddenly need to check your work emails on a Saturday.
Which is always a trap.
It is. But we are just profoundly uncomfortable with the empty spaces in our lives. And the audio excerpt we're diving into today suggests this reflex isn't just some quirky modern habit born out of the smartphone era.
No, not at all. It's actually a fundamental, deeply ingrained part of the human condition.
Yeah. And the focal point of our deep dive today is a concept called the 24th gene key.
Which, for anyone who might not be intimately familiar with that terminology, a gene key essentially acts as an archetypal code.
Right. It's a framework drawn from various esoteric traditions, basically mapping out how human consciousness evolves.
Evolving from these low-frequency, heavy patterns, which the material calls shadows.
Yeah, into high-frequency, liberated states, known as gifts. So our mission for this deep dive is to map out the specific journey of this 24th gene key.
It's a fascinating progression.
It really is. We are tracing a path that starts in the everyday weight of our hidden addictions, moves through this sudden spark of invention, and ultimately arrives at a state of profound living silence.
And to set the stage here, the overarching framework the speaker uses relies on two opposing cosmic forces, gravity and levity.
But we aren't talking about apples falling from trees.
Right, exactly. Not physical gravity that keeps the planets in orbit. This is a psychological and spiritual gravity.
Okay, so define that for us. What does spiritual gravity feel like?
It's the internal density, that heaviness that pulls us down into rigid, repetitive loops.
And the other force, levity, is obviously the opposite. It's what lifts us out of those loops. It clarifies our thinking, expands our perspective, and just opens our hearts to a much greater vision of what our lives can actually look like.
Yeah, and the entire progression of this 24th gene key is about the mechanics of moving out of that crushing psychological gravity and allowing levity to take over.
But we can't just skip to the levity.
No. The speaker is very clear that we cannot reach a state of levity without first confronting the mud.
We have to look closely at those noisy, heavy patterns keeping us trapped, which the audio labels the shadow of addiction.
And that word addiction is used very specifically here.
It completely redefines the word, honestly. Because usually when we hear addiction, we think of a severe, rare affliction involving chemical substances, drugs, alcohol.
But the speaker insists that absolutely no one escapes this shadow.
Everyone has it.
Everyone. It is positioned as a universal human condition. And it stems from the very real, deep discomfort of simply existing in a physical body.
So the mechanism of addiction here isn't defined by the substance itself, but by this process called misidentification.
Yes. We experience a state of internal suffering, whether that's grief, numbness, existential angst, or even just sheer boredom.
And because our minds desperately want to avoid feeling that internal state, we project our focus outward.
We identify with something in the material world to distract us.
Right, so the addiction could be overworking, it could be gambling, it could be eating, sex, or just scrolling online for hours.
Any of it.
The way I understood the mechanics here, and I love this analogy, it is basically like we are constantly hitting the snooze button on our own emotional alarms.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Like the alarm is the internal suffering, and the addictive pattern is just the snooze button. It doesn't turn off the fact that we have to wake up and face the day eventually.
All right.
It merely delays it.
It just delays the inevitable, and the physical and emotional toll of living in that state of delay is immense.
Because it's exhausting.
Totally exhausting. The audio points out that psychological gravity creates a literal somatic response, like we physically and emotionally contract.
We start breathing less deeply.
Exactly. Our nervous systems become rigid and overstressed because we're constantly running this background program of avoidance.
I do want to push back on the terminology just a little bit, though.
Okay, yeah, let's hear it.
I mean, is addiction genuinely the appropriate word for someone who just, say, doom scrolls on social media for an hour? Or maybe uses a busy work schedule to avoid thinking about a bad breakup?
It sounds a bit extreme, right?
Yeah. Using the exact same word for a workaholic and someone struggling with a life-threatening chemical dependency seems like it could dilute the severity of the word.
I get that. But the speaker is very deliberate in using that specific word because the underlying energetic mechanism is identical.
The misidentification part.
Right. Any pattern utilized to unconsciously avoid internal discomfort, what the recording calls the weight of the world, qualifies as this shadow.
So it's about the function, not the severity.
Precisely. Whether the distraction is a destructive chemical substance or just a brightly lit screen, the end result is a loop of psychological gravity. It creates this self-perpetuating cycle.
Because we feel an underlying emptiness, so we engage in the distraction.
And deep down, we know we're avoiding something.
Which generates that subtle sense of guilt and regret, like when you close TikTok after 2 hours and just feel gross.
Exactly. And that guilt makes us feel heavier, which triggers the need for more distraction to avoid the guilt.
It's a trap, and if this gravitational pull is a universal default, the momentum seems almost impossible to break.
It does. But the audio suggests the only way to reverse it isn't through force.
Right, it's through a very specific kind of radical self-honesty, which draws a direct parallel to the well-known 12-step recovery programs.
The very first step in those programs is admitting the reality of your condition.
Acknowledging that you are caught in a loop you just cannot easily control.
And the speaker brings in a really fascinating linguistic detail here. They note that the original translation for this 24th hexagram in the Chinese I Ching is the concept of returning.
Returning.
Yeah. The mechanism of reversing gravity requires going back to your roots. You have to return to the essential self and objectively examine the coping mechanisms you've built up over a lifetime.
So instead of just passively reflecting, it's more like acting as a ruthless auditor for your own emotional ledgers.
A ruthless auditor, yes.
You have to comb through your daily transactions and find exactly where you are hiding your emotional debts. You have to look at your routine and ask, what specific behavior prevents me from enjoying life's pauses?
That's the core question.
Right. And once you identify that behavior and admit the reality of the gravity, the audio moves to the next phase, which again mirrors that 12-step philosophy.
Invoking a higher power or a higher state of awareness.
And the terminology used in the recording for this ultimate state of levity is the Siddhi.
Spelled S-I-D-D-H-I, just to clarify.
Right. It's an ancient Sanskrit word meaning a divine gift or an elevated state of realization.
So the shadow is the gravity and the Siddhi is the levity.
But the crucial mechanic here is that pulling yourself out of gravity is not achieved through direct action. You cannot brute force your way to levity.
No, you can only invite it in through contemplation.
And that distinction between forced action and contemplation is central to this entire philosophy.
Because willpower isn't enforced action. It springs from a place of resistance or self-judgment.
Or a desire to combat a perceived flaw.
Exactly. And because willpower requires fighting against yourself, it generates friction. And friction is still a form of gravity.
See, that dynamic is something I struggled with initially when I was listening to the sources.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, if I want to stop a destructive scrolling habit, the logical move seems to be deleting the apps, blocking the websites, and just sort of white-knuckling my way through the ensuing boredom, you know?
The standard modern approach. Just power through it.
Right. Just use discipline.
But the problem is, willpower eventually runs out of energy because it is fueled by tension.
It's exhausting.
Contemplation, conversely, relies on what the speaker beautifully describes as the soil of time.
The soil of time. I love that phrase.
It's a surrender rather than a fight. It requires sitting with the discomfort of the pause and taking a leap of faith.
The audio describes contemplation as reaching your hand out into a dark tunnel and simply trusting that a higher state of awareness at the other end will eventually reach back and pull you toward the light.
Just waiting in the dark.
Yeah. But the idea of just sitting in that uncomfortable pause, watching the gravity of your own shadow without immediately trying to fix it, it sounds incredibly passive.
For a lot of people, yeah.
For someone who is used to optimizing their life, it probably sounds like a massive waste of time.
Right.
But the audio positions this waiting period as an intense incubation phase.
Leading to something explosive.
Exactly. The gift of invention.
And we really need to clarify the term invention as it's used in this framework.
Yeah, because it's invention with a capital I.
Right. The speaker makes a sharp distinction between inventiveness and invention.
Inventiveness is just a mental knack.
It's a skill set. You use it to devise clever life hacks or efficient workarounds for your problem.
But invention is characterized as a profound mystery. It's described as an energy that wells up entirely from the unknown.
It's effervescent. It's surprising.
Yeah, the mechanism here is that invention provides the exact influx of qi or life force energy required to overpower the psychological gravity and draw you upward.
It's the moment your patient contemplation finally sparks into transformative action.
And to map out how this spark reshapes a human life, the speaker cites this old Chinese proverb.
Which details the cascade of transformation.
Right, it goes, sow a thought, reap an action. Sow an action, reap a habit. Sow a habit, reap a character. Sow a character, reap a destiny.
The progression is highly mechanical, really.
Yeah, you've audited your shadow, identified the heavy pattern, and through silent contemplation, a totally new, inventive thought bubbles up.
A completely fresh approach to your trigger that you have never considered before.
And when that thought arrives, you act on it.
But because that action originates from a higher state of levity rather than a place of fearful resistance, it carries a totally different energetic signature.
It feels different.
Right. So the next time you face the trigger, you take that elevated action again, which leads to the next step in the proverb, reaping a habit.
However, the speaker introduces a really vital semantic shift here.
Yes, substituting the word habit with custom.
And that distinction is crucial. Habits feel rigid, don't they?
Very rigid.
They imply something enforced through discipline that you might actually resent maintaining. But a custom is a practice you follow willingly, with a sense of grace and natural rhythm.
It's something you choose because it feels good. Over time, following that healthy custom genuinely alters your character.
You become someone who operates from a baseline of levity rather than avoidance.
And ultimately, that altered character reaps a completely new, higher destiny.
Invention rebuilds your trajectory from the inside out. Which brings me to an analogy from the material that I absolutely loved. It fundamentally changes how we interact with our own flaws.
The compost analogy.
Yes. The audio suggests we shouldn't view our shadows or our addictive patterns as toxic waste that needs to be eradicated. We should treat them as compost.
Which is brilliant.
It is, because compost is messy, it smells, and it is uncomfortable to turn over and examine. But that dense breaking down matter is the exact fertilizer required to grow a higher purpose.
Your levity literally feeds on the decomposed material of your past struggles.
The compost of the shadow fuels the spark of invention, lifting the individual out of the gravitational pull.
And once that spark of invention lifts us out of the gravity, the destination isn't just, a slightly better mood.
Or a more productive afternoon.
Right. The audio points to a state it calls the siddhi, or city of silence, which completely dismantles our modern assumption of what silence actually is.
Because we typically equate silence with an absence of noise.
Right.
A void where just nothing is happening.
Exactly. And the speaker categorizes this as man-made digital silence.
Digital silence.
Yeah, it's described as vacuous, numb, and entirely dead. It is entropic.
But true silence, according to the excerpt, isn't an empty vacuum at all. It isn't even described as golden, it's silver.
Likened to the hidden jewels of the deep feminine sea.
It is intensely alive. The recording describes this true silence as pregnant, pulsing with frequency, light, and wave upon wave of hidden luster.
It is a vibrant cosmic state.
It really is. But that vivid description immediately forces us to ask a tough question. If true silence is so rich and alive, why do we instinctively run from it?
Why do we fill every pause with addictive distractions?
Exactly. And the speaker explains that humans are terrified of the void, the Buddhist concept of emptiness, because it triggers our deepest, most primal fear.
The fear of annihilation and death.
Now, the audio claims this fear of annihilation is actually illogical, which is a bold statement.
Very bold.
I mean, okay, let's unpack this void thing, because honestly, total silence and the fear of our own end feels like the most deeply ingrained biological imperative we possess. Total silence sounds terrifying to me.
It's totally natural to feel that way. But the recording argues the fear of annihilation is an illusion because, from the perspective of this profound silence, there is only eternity.
So nothing is ever genuinely lost.
Right. Energy merely transforms from one state into another. The psychological block occurs because our minds, which are heavily conditioned by a materialistic society, struggle to grasp the concept of eternal continuity.
Because we are surrounded by a cultural paradigm that insists the physical, tangible world is the absolute limit of reality.
And when you believe the material world is all there is, the universe inherently feels unsafe.
We're conditioned to view death as the ultimate failure, something to fight and delay at all costs, rather than a natural transformation.
And to be fair, the speaker even concedes their own vulnerability here. They note that if an individual harbored absolutely no trace of this fear, they would be a fully awakened, embodied divinity, like a Buddha.
So experiencing the fear is literally a standard feature of the human operating system.
It's built in.
All of our surface-level anxieties are just this core fear of death masquerading in different outfits.
Exactly. And the most counterintuitive takeaway from the audio is the assertion that fear is safe.
Fear is safe. That's hard to wrap your head around.
It is, but the fear itself is not the enemy. It is merely a physical sensation.
A vibration moving through the cells of a body that has temporarily forgotten its connection to eternity.
Right, so the mechanics of overcoming it do not involve fighting or suppressing the feeling.
You simply let the fear in. You allow it to be present without identifying with it.
Just let it flow entirely through your system so it can transmute.
And when you stop damming up that current of fear and allow it to just wash through you, the scope of this entire journey shifts. We realize this process from addiction to silence is not just a personal optimization technique.
It's much bigger than that.
Yeah, the audio expands the lens massively in the final section, tying this individual journey to a continuous cosmic cycle of existence.
This brings us to a broader mechanism called the ring of life and death.
Right, because the 24th gene key does not operate in isolation.
No, it works in tandem with another code, the 44th gene key.
And together they regulate this immense divine plan of human evolution.
While the 24th gene key governs the internal process of returning to the self, the 44th governs the external fractal patterns.
Like the karmic relationships and soul groups we continually interact with across lifetimes.
The recording compares this grand evolutionary story to a massive, intricate artwork, specifically the Bayeux Tapestry.
Oh, right, where every human life is just one thread moving through the broader design.
And the silence we have been discussing, that is the cosmic pool that we constantly dip into and out of.
We incarnate out of this vibrant, pregnant silence, taking on physical form to play out our specific roles.
And interact with our fractal connections. And when the lifetime concludes, we excavate back into the silence to rest, renew, and recalibrate.
So the translation of the 24th gene key as returning takes on a much heavier, multi-layered meaning in this context.
It's not just a one-off thing.
Right. We don't just return to our roots in one lifetime. We continually return to the physical plane, facing the heavy gravity of the earth over and over again.
We encounter our shadows, we endure the friction, we find the spark of invention, and we touch the silence.
And the purpose of this repetitive cycle of returning is the slow, deliberate polishing of the human soul.
The gravity provides the necessary friction.
Without the dense challenge of physical existence, the soul cannot be refined.
We run through the cycle until the soul shines completely resplendent.
Okay, so what does this all mean for us when the story ends?
Well, when a soul has been fully polished and the individual has completely integrated that profound state of levity, the audio suggests a final mechanism. Graduation.
Graduation.
Yes. When you embody that ultimate city of silence, you hand in the costume.
You graduate from the earth plane and its heavy gravitational field entirely.
Exactly. The sheer frequency of that levity makes it impossible for the consciousness to return to a dense physical form,
allowing the evolutionary journey to continue in a new, timeless state.
but bringing this massive cosmic framework right back down to your everyday reality for a moment.
Yes, the practical application.
The next time you experience that sudden pang of discomfort, that itch to run from the quiet, to pick up your phone, to fall into a familiar heavy pattern, observe the gravity at work.
Don't immediately fight it with willpower, but don't capitulate to the distraction either.
Allow yourself to sit in the messy compost of the moment. Give the pause enough time and space for the silence to well up.
Because you cannot predict what sudden invention might emerge to rewrite your destiny.
Exactly.
Well, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. And it ties directly back to how the excerpt redefined true silence. Not as a dead vacuum, but as something intensely alive, with frequency, light, and hidden luster.
It's a beautiful concept.
It is. Consider this. Have you ever been alone in a room so completely quiet that you begin to perceive a faint, high-pitched ringing? A tiny, almost imperceptible background hum. We generally dismiss that sound as neurological static, right? Like a trick of the inner ear or just an annoying distraction.
Yeah, we just ignore it.
But what if that sound isn't static at all? What if that faint hum is the actual, literal frequency of eternity? What if it is the pregnant cosmic silence literally singing its timeless truth to you, just patiently waiting for you to stop fighting the gravity, drop your everyday distractions, and finally listen to the music of the void?